language in a very good way, so I don't need to explain anything, so I don't know why I am here. But as a formality, I have to go through my slides. Okay, guys, so bear with me. Now, first of all, I want to ask a question. Are you guys okay with English, or do I need to switch to Bangla? Which one do you prefer? English? Like you're confused, like your boss is saying, hey, can you do it? Ah, yeah, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it, no worries. Okay, so my name is Tawsif Aqib. My introduction has already been given, but what I want to tell you that I am actually Elixir enthusiastic, so whenever I have a chance, I actually boost out Elixir. I love that language. And did you guys know this? You actually do not need functional language to do functional programming. So actually it's all about side effect. The main power of a functional language is that it actually completely avoids the side effect. So what is side effect? Zubair already explained that. In a general term, I'm not actually a very theoretical person. I cleverly avoid all the theoretical terms. So in my dictionary, side effects means I want to do something inside a function, but unfortunately that function does something in behind. Like I am actually getting a list of users, but actually that function calls the database, collect those users, map those users into the users model, then it sees if there is any related object or not, like post, and then map it again and then returns it to me. So it's actually doing a lot of things. This is kind of a side effect. So why are we going to use functional language? I think you already covered that. It's very easy to test and very easy to read and reason about. Although it's debatable about, very easy to read and debate about, but you will get used to it when you use it. Avoid confusing problem and errors and easier debugging, but beware of the resource users, okay? Because functional programming languages actually use a little bit more resources. Then the question comes, why are we going to use that? Actually, when the functional programming language was first introduced, it was actually 50 years ago, probably, I'm not sure, but Lisp actually was introduced in 1958 or 56, I forgot. But in that moment, the resources of the servers was not abundant. It was really small, so we couldn't actually use the whole power of functional programming language. Okay, but right now, it's actually possible for us to use the power of functional programming language. Okay. So peer function. Return some value of the same arguments and no side effect. So what it means is, when you want to, when you give same argument to a same function, no matter where you are, no matter when it is, it will always give you the same result. So there's theory. And I don't want to go through that because we already covered that. But let's look into the code, okay? I actually need to look into what I'm going to cover over here is, imagine we're using object-oriented programming language or any kind of imperative language. So I want to convert my imperative programming syntaxes or statements into somewhat functional languages, okay? So I want to use the functional paradigm or functional technique inside my object-oriented language or imperative language. How am I going to do it? How can I bring a little flavor of functional language inside the current code I'm writing, whether it is object-oriented or functional, okay? So look at this function. It's actually written in PHP because PHP is the most beautiful object-oriented language in the world, puns intended. And who works in PHP over here? Can I see some hands? People in the back. Why? Are you afraid others are going to scold you? Why are you not run? Okay, I will ask that personally. Go ahead. I'm a PHP developer, okay? Not by heart, by profession. কে তালে দিচ্ছে? PHP ওলারাই দিচ্ছে মনে হয়। So anyway, let's move on. Avoid temporary variables. So the first step of converting my imperative language or imperative statement into functional is to move all the unwanted variables I have created, like in this function. This function actually checks whether the given number is actually a positive one or negative one, right? So it's positive, whether it runs an if function, checks if the number is written than 0, store the value into the status variable, then else, then status false, and then return status. But obviously, there's too much code. Let's see how we can remove all these unnecessary variables, okay? So let's check out the better version. We can actually remove the else one, and also the extra variable that is status. So if number is written as 0, return true, return false, but we can actually minimize it a little bit more. We can directly return if the number is written as 0, right? Why? Because functional language also suggests us to remove all the unnecessary conditions. Okay, all unnecessary codes, and that's the interesting part of functional programming language, and most of the people actually find difficulty reading that because everybody try to do it in a one single line. So use small function. So you can see the single responsibility principle of solid. It's very important for us to use small functions. Why? Because it's easier to test. It has only one single task to do, and it will force you to keep all the side effects away from your code, and we will look into it later. Referential transparency. So what it means is, any expression can be replaced with the value of the expression without changing the application behavior. Very interesting sentence, like I'm good at reading, but what it means is, look into the function. It actually add two numbers and returns the summation of the number. And I can compose that. Compose means I can actually pass the function as an argument into the same function or any other function. It means composing. I'm composing two functions and creating a combined statement, like the last one. Second one, echo sum 3 and 4 and sum 3 and 5. But look into the third one. I have replaced sum 3 and 4 into 7, right? So it means the referential transparency means I can actually replace a function with the value directly without changing any application behavior. So if I replace sum 3 and 4 with 7, it will give me the same output, right? It will give me 17, no matter what. So this is actually one of the let's say paradigm of functional programming languages, and this actually remove the errors. Remove the errors and makes your application more testable. Okay, now the tricky part. Remove state. I hate that guy. No, not literally. Come on, man. I don't even know you. I'll get to know you later. Then tea break. Okay. So remove state. What it means is we're going to remove all these states from this function, just like I want to remove the time bindings from my talk, but I cannot. Just like I am not being able to remove all these states from the object-oriented language, but I will try to do it as much as possible. So there's lots of states in here, huh? So product programming language, let's say, return total. Okay, the state means I'm actually storing the variables into the total function, right? It actually stores the states of the loop. But in functional programming language, if I remove the state and use a function like a reduce function or make a recursive function, that actually force me to remove all these states. And believe me or not, having states inside your code is one of the main reasons why we face a lot of errors. Having state is one of the main problems. I don't know about you, but I'm guilty of that. I face lots of problems. Okay, now recursion. Everybody knows about recursion, right? How about tail call recursion? Do we know what tail call recursion is? We know what tail call recursion is. Good. Can I see your hand a little bit? Yeah, remember this guy. Anything about tail call recursion, you can talk with this guy. And because I don't have enough time, I'm moving forward. Thanks, guys. Push impure functions. Okay? I want to cover this one a little bit. So what impure functions means? Whatever doing something behind our back, like writing a file, writing something in the database, right? So one of the main theory or paradigm of functional programming language is you cannot have impure function, but that's not possible. You always need an impure function in your system, right? So what you can do is, at least, you can isolate those impure function into separate function, like this one. So in the previous one, what we did is we were reading a file, and we were creating a loop and echoing all the lines. But in here, we separated function into two separate functions, where one function actually collect only the file, and second one do the loop. So in this way, we are separating all the impure function, like over here, we are fetching a file into a separate function that we can mock during the test, and in the next function, which actually loop through the lines, it's not a loop, mapping through the line, and doing the pure stuff, okay? And it's obviously easily testable. Immutability, you see those names? Tawsif, Jitu, and Nopu, they're all here, and Shahibhai just joined, right? So the problem is, array push actually completely changed the user array or user list. So in here, the user variable is actually passing the reference instead of a value. And that's why it is being changed. But actually, functional programming language will tell you or force you that there is no mutability in your system. If you want to mutate an variable, you need to reassign that variable, just like over here. New users, array merge, I'm merging the array, and I'm assigning that new array into a new user. And users and new users are two different arrays. Okay, loops are imperative, we all know that. Use some temporary variables and they aren't very readable. I think I can slingshot this one. This is a loop, right? It is getting the user and mapping the users into a user's model or data transfer object. What map does is, map does the same thing, but without using any loop. Do we all know about map? I think everybody knows about map, right? Map, filter, and reduce. Am I right? Yes. Are you guys hungry? But you need to stay cool, man. You have a lot of time ahead. A little bit louder, huh? Do you know about filters? You guys are really hungry. Come on. Do you know about reduce? It's not working. Let's not try anymore. So how about pipeline? Okay. So pipeline means you can actually compose the functions, and this is the pipeline. Huh? Compose the functions. So I'm getting the use. How much time do you have? 5 minutes. Oh, wow, that's enough. Okay. So users, find users, and then I'm actually trying to find out the Bonani users and calling the function get users by location, passing users as variable, and I'm trying to find out the average age of all the users who stay in Bonani. I'm guessing it's going to be very low because there's lots of startup offices over there. And no native, but problem is there is no native solution for most of the non-functional language. Okay, because non-functional language do not give you the feature of pipe. It actually gives you, it actually forces you to write function like get average, then get users by location, then find users. But the problem is readability. Where is the first step or first function that is going to run in this 3-function composition? Which one? Find users? Wow, you have to read from the right side. Find users, then get users by location, get average. That is a problem for a few people, just like me. I'm lazy. Oh damn, I said that. Okay, I'm lazy. I always say that. So I am not going to read from the left. I will always try to read from the left. Okay. So interestingly, there are packages to solve all these problems, pipelines. There is one such package called Titan Co Collect. I didn't use that. I got that from internet because that package only gives you the facility of using the collection library that belongs to the Laravel framework to use it outside of the framework. So who over here has worked on Laravel? Oh, all the PHP guy, of course. Who have heard about Laravel? A lot of people. Very good. Laravel is actually an amazing framework, but interestingly, Laravel is a framework that leverages the power or ideas of other frameworks, even .NET. Even .NET, yes. And if you look into the function collection, where they actually create an instance of collection of get users, and then you see it's mapping, map users to do, and then subsequently or continuously it filters by get users by location, and then it runs a map, get total age, and then it averages. So it is much more readable, right? But what they're doing over here is they're actually running a pipeline, a pipe. First they're mapping it, then they're filtering it, then they're again mapping it, then they're collecting the average. Okay? So this kind of library will actually give you a lot of leverage in writing your code in a little bit functional way, and will give you the opportunity to think outside of our traditional object-oriented programming or imperative way. So one of the, actually it's actually ended, so that's why I'm continuing. One of the important thing or difficult thing I have found while coding in Elixir or any other functional language, I tried Haskell, it was very tough. And is that the thinking way or the way we think is actually completely different. I tried to mutate data and I couldn't do it. I tried to write recursion and unfortunately I couldn't do it, and unfortunately I couldn't continue my talk over here anymore. So what to choose? OOP or functional programming language? I prefer to choose both. It's because I will use whatever I need whenever I need it, but the interesting thing is I will use as much as functional programming ideas I can in my object-oriented language. And please ask easy questions, of course. But if you don't want to ask, I wouldn't mind. Yeah, I said I wouldn't mind it.
Okay. Actually, we've seen what you have shown that about how the each implementation, each kind of implementation will do in functional programming compared with object-oriented. But about very high level, we know about different layer, data layer, business layer, UI layer. In each layer, maybe there are different parts or different layer, multiple layer. And in object-oriented programming also, there are like abstraction, inheritance we use, or sometimes interface used for multiple implementation, so that you can change implementation in any time without affecting the current one. So how these things goes or these stuffs are done in functional code?
Well, if I'm not wrong, what you're trying to say is how we can, what kind of similar facility like encapsulation, polymorphism we have for functional programming language that makes our life easier in programming.
Yeah, right. Plus architectural point of view.
Right, okay. So in terms of the layers, of the 7 layers you're talking about, it has nothing to do with programming language mostly. You can actually, the programming actually doesn't necessarily need to be related with all those layers. It needs to be related with how you are making your business logic. And the encapsulation, polymorphism, interface, the thing that we're talking about, is actually the paradigm of object-oriented language, and obviously you can use none of them in functional programming language. So how you're going to do it? Every programming language has their own idea of structuring your code or business logic, because these are the idea of structuring your business logic, the encapsulation, polymorphism. I can actually tell a little bit about Elixir. Elixir has similar thing. They do not have interface, that they have something similar called behavior. They do not have models, they have struct, and you can actually relate all these things in all other programming languages over here. All you need to do is try a little bit to find out more about this thing, and you'll find a solution actually. And sometimes you won't, of course. You need to find, redact some stuff.
So we can change any implementation without affecting current implementation. So there are some code written. We would like to inject new dependency without changing code, existing code?
No, you need to make a certain change into the code if you want to use functional programming language inside a non-functional programming language. Yes, you need to make a certain changes.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you talk a bit about Elixir in terms of how it is different from Scala or Sharp? How does it? How does it differ?
Okay, I didn't try Scala. Let's not compare with any other language. I will talk about one or two minutes about Elixir. You can relate with any other programming language you know. Why Elixir is different is Elixir is actually built on Erlang VM. Erlang is, as Jubair has said, Erlang has made an impossible thing possible in WhatsApp. So what Elixir does is, the author of Elixir, Joseph Ali, he was using Ruby at the moment, but he was having problem with concurrency and performance. And then he actually stumbled upon Erlang. But the syntax of Erlang was very cruel. He had a hard time reading and writing that. So he actually used the metaprogramming of the Erlang part and created the Elixir language that runs inside the Elixir VM. So why Elixir is special? The first is, Elixir has a beautiful syntax. I believe Ruby has the beautiful syntax in all the programming languages I have ever used or heard about. I may be opinionated, but anyway. And Erlang is actually very similar to Ruby in terms of syntax. The readability is excellent. And the most important part is, it is not, it's a dominating like any other functional language. Like I had problem writing in Haskell. Clojure, damn, that was a nightmare. Clojure is a nightmare. I don't think anybody likes Clojure except Muffin and Bhai. I don't think so. Anyway, but Elixir is actually beautiful. And you will be surprised to see the Phoenix programming language, Phoenix framework. Phoenix framework is a very lightweight framework, although it is comparable to any other full stack framework, but it is actually one of the best framework I have ever seen. You should try Elixir. You should try Elixir. I got another one.
Which IDE can we use for Phoenix?
Which?
IDE.
IDE. Well, Phoenix. Okay. Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer a full-fledged IDE or you want to build your IDE as you like?
IntelliJ, can it be used?
IntelliJ IDE? Yes, IntelliJ IDE, they have a plugin called Alchemist. It is an official plugin. You can use it over here, there. But you can also use Visual Studio Code with Elixir LS plugin, which is actually more than enough to cover all the features of IntelliJ IDE.
Yeah, I tried in VS Code. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Wow. More question. It's not my fault, man. You can't look at me like that.
This is a naive question, but it goes anyway. If I omit the syntax, just focus on the concurrency, what's the difference between which will be, you think, the best to pick, Golang or Elixir?
Golang or?
Elixir.
Sorry,
Elixir.
No, Elixir. Well, I also write Go language. I also use Go language. Look, everybody have a personal preference, okay? But I will always say you should select the right tool for the right job. Like if you are not using distributed system, if you are not making distributed system, I will not suggest to use Elixir. It's hard for me to say. I am having a heavy heart, but I will not suggest anybody to use Elixir if they are not using distributed system, because the main power of Elixir language is the OTP, which actually leverages the distributed system of Erlang VM. Other than that, if you're writing a small application like a microservice, I would suggest you to use Go. But if you are building an API in more than 20, at least 20 or 30 endpoint, good luck with Go. Done.